Chris, why are you home? Angela, my spouse of 28 years, asked as she came in through the garage and saw me at the kitchen table, less than 10 feet away. Her body partially blocked a tall, younger man following her into our home. Angela is always beautiful. She's a striking 5 feet 9 inches, weighs a healthy 145 pounds, and has auburn hair that falls over her shoulders. She always dresses professionally for work, and today she was wearing a white blouse with an extra button undone, showing off her great cleavage between her spectacular 38D cup chest. A black pencil skirt highlighted her world-class legs, and 3 in high heels, she had on a dress that showed off her butt. I thought about Angela's question, which seemed a bit silly at first, and said that I live there. She looked a little annoyed when she asked why I was home at 3:30 in the afternoon. I often joke that I've loved Angela since we first met. I met her when she was working as an administrative assistant for 4 top executives in her company. She took me to the senior suite for hours of meetings. I asked her out to dinner, and she walked me back to the lobby. The rest is history. Angie's companion had maneuvered around. Around 3 o'clock, I'll often tell anyone who'll listen that I loved Angela since we first met. I met her when she was the administrative assistant for 4 top executives in her company. She walked with me to the senior suite for hours of meetings. I asked her to dinner as she walked me back to the lobby, and the rest is history. Angie's companion had maneuvered around her and stood at her side, anticipating a smirk. I was surprised to see concern in his intelligent eyes. Clearly, things weren't going as planned. I couldn't help but question Angie about the reason for her early arrival home an hour and a half earlier than expected. Angela and I have been inseparable since our first date. I dedicated all my energy to her and our family, establishing a successful Angie, and I have been inseparable since our first date. I dedicated all my energy to her and our family, and we established a successful insurance brokerage firm with the assistance of her employer. Angie achieved a bachelor's degree in 6 years, progressing from a support role to leading HR in the company's Hartford, Connecticut office. Having loved Angie unconditionally for nearly 3 decades, I faced her transformation with determined calmness. I wanted to break her as effectively as she broke me, so I gave Angie my signature crooked grin, prompting her response, "We came home early to talk with you." I asked Angie about the whole thing where we locked eyes. Taking advantage of the moment to introduce himself, her companion confidently stated that he was Michael Browner, the new attorney at Kellerman & Sons, closely collaborating with her for the past couple of months. Despite his extended hand, which I ignored, and while keeping my eyes on Angie, I refrained from reacting strongly, opting to just let out a growl and assert that I knew exactly who and what he was for the first time. I noticed signs of concern in my wife, and she cringed when I mentioned on you once threatened severe consequences for anyone who called you on. Why tolerate such disrespect in your own home from? I pointed at the guy I'm calling Mofo and said, "This guy." Angie always worries and gets confused. She's a really good planner. I was sure she and Mofo had planned every possible thing that could go wrong during this conversation. I was already a betrayed man. I looked at Mofo and smiled. I was pretty. I'm talking about Mofo. I pointed him out to Angie. She's always worried and confused, but she's also a very detailed planner. I was sure she and Mofo had planned every possible thing that could happen in this conversation. Everything was going to be perfect. I was already a betrayed man. Looking at Mofo made me smile. I was pretty sure his sphincter was tightening, and it was about to be as tight as mine. Things were getting crazy, and it was nothing like what Angie and her friend expected. I tried to push my anger and disgust deep down in my heart. I decided to go with the plan, but I thought it was time to mess up their plans again. I suggested we make 3 drinks and talk in the living room. Angie asked for a glass of wine. When he turned to the other person, he seemed hesitant. He said Angela told him I like bourbon and craft beer. I nodded and said yes. I got up from the kitchen table and went to the family room bar. When I left the room, I said we should make 3 drinks and talk in the living room. Angie asked for a glass of wine. When I turned to the other person, he looked a little nervous. He said he remembered Angela telling him about how I like bourbon and craft beer. I nodded and said yes. I got up from the kitchen table and went to the family room bar. As they moved through the kitchen to the living room, I heard some people whispering. A few minutes later, I joined them. They sat together on the sofa, and Angie got her favorite marrow and Mofo a tulip glass of amber ale. I sat in an armchair across from them. After I raised my glass in salute, I took a sip of the strong drink. Mofo took a sip of his beer, looking at the color, and I heard some quiet, urgent whispering as they moved through the kitchen to the living room. A few minutes later, I joined them. They sat together on the sofa, handing Angie her favorite marrow and Mofo. I settled into an armchair across from them. After raising my glass in salute, I took a sip of the fiery liquid. Mofo sipped his beer, studying the color and carbonation. He made a remark about the complexity of the amber ale, asking about its identity. I responded that it was Pabst Blue Ribbon. At the mention of the beer, Mofo's eyes flared with anger, and Angie, appearing confused, mentioned my previous claim that Pabst Blue Ribbon was worse than donkey urine and considered the worst beer ever made. She was midway through her comment when she saw me laughing. He made a comment about how complicated amber ale is and asked what it was. I told him it was Pabst Blue Ribbon. When he heard this, Mofo's eyes got all angry, and Angie, who seemed confused, mentioned something about how I said Pabst Blue Ribbon was worse than donkey urine and the worst beer ever. She was halfway through her comment when she saw me laughing. She said she was frustrated and that I was being rude and condescending during what was supposed to be a calm conversation. I smiled and asked her about what she meant, and said that maybe we should start the conversation with a kick. I thought I was going to learn about having a polite, uplifting, and loving discussion from my wife. Angie cringed and looked away. Swoop took. She said she was bothered by how rude and condescending I was being, even though it was supposed to be a calm conversation. I smiled and asked her if she was really saying that, and suggested that we start the conversation again. I thought I'd be learning about having a polite, uplifting, and loving discussion from my wife. Angie cringed and looked away. I started to talk about the things we needed to talk about. I interrupted, looked at him, and pointed out his first use of Mr. Harrington before switching to calling me Chris. I insisted on being called Mr. Harrington, and his face started to redden. I finished with a shrug and suggested calling me Sir instead. I turned to Angie. I cut in and asked Angie what she wanted to talk about. When Swip seemed like he was about to answer, I jumped in and told him to just sit there, drink his complex amber ale, and stay quiet. Angie, mad as hell, said she wasn't happy with how I'd acted that afternoon and that it had to stop. I nodded, making it seem like. I asked her what she was thinking about, and she said she was upset about something I'd said or done recently. She said she had more friends at the office than I did, and she was worried that I was acting weird. Then she said she'd gotten an email about me having an affair, and it had 3 pictures of me on a picnic at Middlewoods Park. I told Swip to stop talking and listen to me. I told him to sit there and drink his beer. Angie was really mad. She said I needed to stop acting this way. I nodded and looked at her like I was thinking about what she said. I asked her if she thought I was better or worse than her over the last 5 or 6 weeks. She looked confused and worried. She asked me to explain. I stopped breathing for a second, like I was thinking hard about what to say. Then I looked at Angie and said that I was worried about something. I told her I was upset about her being with someone else or treating me like an idiot. Angela was shocked. She narrowed her eyes and said in a whisper that she had more friends at my office than I did. She got an email 2 weeks ago about me supposedly cheating. The email had 3 pictures of me on a picnic at Middlewoods Park. There was a pic of us on a picnic at Middlewoods Park, and we were holding hands and kissing. She was apologizing for the way she found out. Angela was trying to figure out how to move forward when I jumped in and asked if she wanted a divorce, and she said no. She moved to the edge of the couch, leaned forward, rested her elbows on her knees, and passionately expressed her love for me. Angela clarified that her thing with Michael was she told me that she'd only been seeing Michael for a short time, and he was new to Connecticut and hadn't made many friends. She said she thought he'd find a regular girlfriend once he was settled. She was sorry, but she wanted a monogamous relationship with a loving wife. She said she was sorry, but a divorce would be better for her future. She asked me to stop acting like I didn't want a divorce, and said I probably felt the same. She said her relationship with Michael was a one-night stand. Time flew, and she said it was nothing more than her attraction to him and a desire for more excitement in her life. She assured me that it had never happened before and would soon be over, promising that it would never occur again. After taking a small sip of my bourbon, I remained silent for a few moments before responding. I pointed out that I told her her promises didn't mean anything, and we all knew she was a liar. I kept asking why I should believe this was her first affair, and suggested it could be her 51st. I told her to think about how we built our family together, and mentioned that Kelly was married and thinking about having kids. I said that I knew she was a liar, and that everyone in the room knew it too. I asked her why I should believe she had only had one affair, and suggested that it could be her 51st. Told her to think about all the work we put into building our family, and mentioned that with Kelly married and wanting to start her own family, we could now slow down and plan for a great retirement. I said that I thought that in a few years, my fling with Michael would be over, and I forgot. I got up from my seat, didn't ask anyone if they wanted another drink, and went to the den to get my glass. I was sure that the two of them noticed that I hadn't been polite. When I got back to the living room, I saw them huddled together and whispering. Mofo asked if he could say a few things, and I let him. He said that Angela was right about their relationship being short. When I got back, I saw them in the living room, all huddled up and talking in hushed tones. Mofo asked if he could say a few things, so I let him. He said that Angela was right about their relationship being a short-term thing. He said he regretted getting involved with a married woman, and that it was the first time he'd ever done that. He talked about how great Angela was and how he understood why I mentioned divorce. He said not to do it, because of all the years we'd been together, and that we shouldn't just throw it away. He also said something about, he said he had no regrets about getting into a relationship with a married woman, but he admitted it was something he'd never done before. He talked about how great Angela was, and how he understood why I mentioned divorce. He said not to do it, because of all the years we'd spent together, and that he didn't want to throw all that away. He also mentioned Aang's worries about the prenup, saying it might not be enforceable because it was so old and the legal world has changed a lot. He said there wasn't proof of infidelity, and I thought about how my wife had gotten so confused. He finished talking about the legal stuff, then turned to Angela. I told him I didn't get why she was so confused. I was confused by Angela's choice to get legal advice from a corporate attorney who had a below-average grade point average from Texas Southern University Law School, a school that's consistently ranked among the top 10 worst law schools in the country. I questioned how she knew that Swipe didn't finish. I told her that knowing one's enemy was one of my mottos. I redirected my attention to Angela. I asked about her plan for the future. After thinking for a minute, she told me that she and Michael were spending the weekend together. She said they were going to his apartment that night and to New York City the next day. They planned to stay there Friday and Saturday night, and she's going to go home on Sunday. I knew their plans, but my wife's boldness in sharing them made me really sad. I told her how disappointed I was, and I hoped she could see how upset I was. I told her how our New York City getaway, which we'd been looking forward to, would be different. I told her about all the great times we've had there, like when we won an award. I told her how sad I was about her statement, and how it would mess up our tradition of going to New York City for the weekend every 3 months. We used to go to awesome Broadway plays, concerts, and sporting events. I told her how I felt about the fact that our memories of those times were ruined, and I was worried about Angela comparing her to the person she was with. Angela could see that I was really upset, and she did what she could to make me feel better. But I was too focused on the voices in my head telling me to end it, and I couldn't think straight. I told him about my feelings about the tarnishing of those memories, and how I was worried about the change in Angela. He understood how I was feeling, but I was too focused on the voices in my head telling me to end it. I was a very concerned mofo. I asked him about his wife's reaction to his involvement with mine. Angela told me to stop explaining that Michael was a widower and his wife had passed away several years ago. Even the mofo displayed some decency, cringing at my wife's last statement. I smirked and addressed Angela, remarking on the contrast between Michael and her. Without pausing, I asked about her being widowed, and Michael hesitantly confirmed it. I reached down and got a manila folder from the backpack next to my chair. After opening it and scanning the first page, I revealed details about Michael's late wife, Dr. Cynthia Browner. She was an emergency department surgeon at Ascension St. John's Hospital in Detroit, with a husband Michael and 2 daughters, Katie and Lacey. The document mentioned her resignation and relocation to the Hartford, Connecticut area to join her husband immediately after her children finished school. Despite my dissatisfaction with my marriage, I couldn't help but find the look on Angela's face amusing. Angela confronted me about the revelation, asking if I couldn't contain my laughter. I was amused by the situation of a cheat and a liar accusing each other of dishonesty. Michael intervened by reaching out and cupping Angela's hand. Just before I could protest, anger boiled inside me, and I realized something unsettling. I just didn't have the energy to care anymore. Angela's companion began apologizing, confessing to his deceit and professing his desire for her. It was sickening to hear him stand there holding her hand, making plans for their future together, as if I didn't even exist. Angela, after a brief moment of contemplation, took his hand and turned to. I just didn't have the energy to care anymore. Angela's friend started apologizing, admitting he'd lied and saying he wanted to be with her. It was messed up to hear him there, holding her hand and making plans for their future like I didn't even exist. Angela, after a quick think, took his hand and turned to face me, promising to break up with Michael and acting like the loving wife she said she was. As they talked, my heart dropped even more. It was like watching my world fall apart right in front of me. Finally, I got the strength to speak up. I asked for their attention and said I wanted to say what I was thinking and feeling and be heard. I looked at them, and they looked back, and I said, "Hey, can we talk about this?" Lou, who's my divorce attorney, and Michael, who's a corporate attorney, looked at each other like, "What is going on?" Lou said, "I'm representing you in your divorce, and the papers have already been filed." I looked at them, and I was like, "Come on, let's be real here. You're not going to do what you said you'd do, are you?" I finally got them to pay attention. I said, "Hey, can we talk about this?" They looked at each other like, "What is going on?" I said, "I just want to talk about how you two betrayed me." They looked at each other like, "What is going on?" I said, "I just want to talk about this for 30 minutes. They finally agreed, and they sat down. I set up a few Zoom meetings, and I've been doing this since the pandemic. 19 pandemic, as the TV screen flickered to life. I addressed Peter and Lou, asking if they could hear me. Once the introductions were made, I said Angela and her companion by revealing the presence of Lou, my new divorce attorney, and Michael Browner, a corporate attorney. Lou wasted no time in laying out the situation. He informed Angela, now addressed as Mrs. Harrington, that he was representing me in our impending divorce and that papers had already been filed. He gave her a deadline to secure her own legal representation and arranged to be served, warning of the consequences of noncompliance. Lou said that cheating was why they got divorced, and he had proof he had a PI follow Angie around, and he got some pretty incriminating stuff on film. When Lou finished talking, Angie and the others were totally shocked. I put another manila folder on the coffee table in front of them. They looked surprised when I told them it had a copy of our divorce petition. I also showed them the private investigator's report and ASAP reached for the folder. Angie briefly glanced back at the screen. I said that we wanted to make sure the prenup was enforced and that it should be reviewed every 2 years. I was surprised by the loud noise, so I told them it had a copy of our divorce petition. I gave them the private investigator's report and ASAP. Angie looked back at the screen for a second. I said that we wanted to make sure the prenuptial agreement was followed, and that it should be reviewed every 2 years to make sure it was up to date. Angie had signed and notarized every update for the past 28 years, so I was sure it could be enforced next. I told them the board of directors of Herring Brokerage had made a decision the night before. They decided to let Angie go, and she would no longer be working with my firm. I explained that to them. I explained the timeline for returning her company car, canceling company credit cards and cell phone, and terminating memberships to various clubs. I also mentioned the cancellation of joint credit cards and the freezing of joint financial accounts, all in accordance with the prenuptial agreement. Then, we talked about our request for an 80-20 split of assets in my favor, including. We talked about how we'd split the assets, with me keeping the house free and clear, and we'd get an eviction notice soon. Angie would have 30 days to take her stuff out. I said there was no alimony or child support, and that there were other claims that Angie's lawyer could explain. Lou asked if there was anything he needed. I told Lou that he had covered all the essential points and that I appreciated his thoroughness. Then the TV screen went black. Angie immediately stood up and exclaimed, "We should wait." She turned to me and asked to bring them back because she had questions. I told her that it doesn't work that way and that she would need to hire her own. I told him he'd covered all the important stuff, and I was glad he was so thorough. Then the TV screen went black. Angie jumped up right away and said they should wait. She turned to me and asked me to bring them back because she had questions. I told her that didn't work, and she'd need to hire her own lawyer to get answers. Angie then said she was frustrated and that she'd destroy me with a smirk. I turned to her friend and asked what he thought about how this would affect the divorce. He didn't say anything, and Angie sank back into the couch, looking really upset. I couldn't help but smile big, and I waved the TV remote at her before pointing the remote at the TV again as the second Zoom meeting started. I said to Jake, "Can you hear me?" He said he had a conference call to attend and needed to keep it brief. He told Browner he was fired and that his stuff was being taken out of his office and left in the lobby with a 24. Angela was crying, and I could tell she was afraid. Jake said there wouldn't be a recommendation for Angela. I could tell Angela was shaking because her boss was speaking more slowly. I saw that she was terrified, even though he said he was disappointed with her behavior. Jake said he appreciated her 29 years of great work, but he told her that her job in Hartford was gone. He offered her a similar job at their place in Albany, New York. He said she had a week to decide if she wanted to move, and 30. It took a few days to finish moving, and the screen went blank again, leaving Angie in tears while her companion slumped back on the couch. I was smirking at the fool when he saw me, and his rage started to build. He was younger, bigger, and I'll guess stronger. Unfortunately for him, he was as the days went by, the screen went blank again, leaving Angie in tears while her companion slumped back on the couch. I was smirking at the fool when he saw me. His rage started to build. He was younger, bigger, and I'll guess stronger. Unfortunately for him, he was as stupid as a bag of rocks. As the fool was ready to explode, I once again waved the remote, pointed it toward the TV, and pressed a button. The screen lit up, and I asked Dr. Browner, "Can you hear me, fool?" Angie and the fool sat in stunned silence. They were white as ghosts, and their mouths were hanging open. I was about to lose it. I waved the remote, pointed it at the TV, and pressed a button. The screen lit up, and I said, "Dr. Browner, can you hear me?" Angie and Mo were silent. They looked white as ghosts, and their mouths were hanging open. A beautiful blonde filled the screen. Cynthia told Michael that she had filed for divorce and that he should expect to be served in the coming days. She said she was going to stay in Michigan with their kids and that she had kept her job at the hospital. Michael begged Cynthia, asking her to think again and suggesting that they could work things out, insisting that his affair was just a fling. Cynthia looked disgusted on the screen. Cynthia dropped a bombshell: reveals Michael's repeated job losses due to his infidelity. Her additional investigation following Chris's prompt painted a damning picture. She listed the names of Angie's associates and Michael's affairs with each of them. Angie didn't say a word as Cynthia laughed off any expectation of an answer, declared Michael unwelcome in her home, and requested his address for his belongings. The screen faded to black. Angie's revelation about Michael's job losses due to his infidelity, along with the info she gathered after Chris's warning, painted a pretty clear picture. She listed the names of Michael's mistresses, and Angie just sat there, not saying a word. Cynthia just laughed and said that Michael was unwelcome, and she asked for his address so she could send his stuff back. When Michael threatened her, I got super nervous. I grabbed my gun and aimed it at him. It seemed to shake Michael, but I didn't flinch. I said that he could either leave or stay quiet. He didn't say anything, which was the only thing I could have hoped for. I turned back to the screen, and I saw Angie's tear-stained face. She looked really upset. It was a tough sight, and it made me feel a mix of empathy and resolve. Angie said she'd been seeing a counselor for the past 2 weeks, and it made her groan and cry. She was frustrated and said it was ironic that, even though she'd done bad things, she was the one seeking help. I told her, it was a pretty shocking moment, and it made me realize how messed up things were. Angie was visibly upset, and she told me that she'd been seeing a counselor for the past 2 weeks. She groaned and cried, and she was like, "What is so ironic about this? I'm the one seeking mental health support, and I'm the one who did all this messed up stuff." I just laughed and said, "Yeah, it's so messed up." Later, I told Angie about an interesting question Dr. Waters asked during our counseling session. She asked if I understood the saying, "Love is blind," and it really hit home for me. I thought about how my love for Angie had blinded me to her flaws, and it just made me realize how messed up things were. I told Angela about a question Dr. Waters asked during our counseling session. She wanted to know if I understood the saying, "Love is blind," it really hit home for me. I thought about how my love for Angie had made me ignore her infidelity. I told her how I was so sure she would never find anyone else who loved her the way I did. Angie, still visibly upset, said she was going to keep seeing Dr. Waters. She said it was important to have someone you can trust to talk to, especially after something so traumatic. She was amazed at how much humiliation and disrespect she had to deal with from someone she loved so much. But she was still hopeful. She said she was determined to get through it and move on from the relationship. We talked about her plans for the day with Dr. Waters included a Zoom meeting, since he had some concerns about seeking revenge, but was on board with the first 3 meetings as a form of payback. However, Dr. Waters advised against the next meeting, since he was worried that it might hinder Angie's personal recovery due to the emotional pain it could cause. I've thought about it. I'll admit that Dr. Wilson is probably right that the next Zoom meeting is probably going to do more harm than good, but I don't care. This meeting is going to hurt me, but it'll hurt you too. I held up the remote for the 4th time and waved it at her. She shrunk back into the couch in a panic. I pointed it at the TV and pushed. The whole room's eyes were on the screen, and when the face appeared, Angie looked upset and made a noise. Chris's daughter, Kelly, said she loved her dad, and he said he loved her too. Angie started crying and asked how Chris could treat her so badly. Kelly jumped in and said that. She said she'd overheard Angie talking to her boyfriend and knew what they were doing. She said she was disappointed and disgusted by her mother's actions, calling them grotesque and pitiful. Angie tried to justify herself, but Kelly wasn't having it. She said Angie's behavior was selfish and self-centered. I overheard Angie and her boyfriend talking, and I knew what they were up to. Angie said she was disappointed and disgusted by her mother's actions, calling them grotesque and pitiful. Angie tried to justify herself, but Kelly wasn't having it. She said Angie's behavior was selfish and self-absorbed. Angela told Kelly how lonely she was feeling since she moved away and how much she missed her. Kelly, looking confused on the screen, asked if Angela was blaming her for her own problems. Angela said she wasn't, but insisted it wasn't what she meant. Even though Angela begged her to come to Boston to talk, Kelly refused, saying she had plans to be with her new boyfriend and their private celebration near Cape Cod. Kelly revealed her pregnancy and her intention to celebrate with Angela. Told Kelly how lonely she felt, saying she really missed her since she'd moved away. Kelly looked confused and asked if Angela was blaming her for her problems. Angela said she wasn't, but Kelly said she couldn't come to Boston to talk because she was busy with her new boyfriend and a private celebration near Cape Cod. Kelly said she was pregnant and wanted to celebrate that with people who bring love and happiness, not the negativity that's been in Angela's life. Angela said she was the one in charge and demanded an invitation, but Kelly refused, saying she wanted a celebration without all the drama. For the 4th time, the screen went blank while Angela sat there upset. I stood up and secretly put my pistol at the back of my pants. I said I was going out for dinner and would be back in 2 hours, and I told Angela to pack her things. Bringing love and happiness instead of the negativity that's been consuming Angela's life. Angela insisted on her maternal authority, so she demanded an invitation, but Kelly firmly refused, seeking a celebration free of the turmoil Angela represents. For the 4th time, the screen went blank while Angela sat visibly upset. I stood up and discreetly placed my pistol at the back of my pants. I announced that I was going out for dinner and would return in 2 hours. I addressed Angela, requesting that she pack her belongings and informing her that she wouldn't be allowed back until the court responded to my divorce petition, a process expected to take about a week. Turning to Mofo, I reminded him of my capabilities and gave him 3 days to leave the state, warning of severe consequences if he remained by Monday. As I pulled open the front door, I glanced back at the defeated individuals and mentioned the supposed beauty of the upcoming weekend in New York. Second story, my name is Jim Reynolds, and I'm now 56 years old, standing at 5'10". I've been married to Kelly for 22 years. I think she's my soulmate. She's 45, has blonde hair, blue eyes, and is 5'10". She's built for lovemaking. I cherished our lovemaking moments whenever we were alone, although there were times she didn't reciprocate. I spent 8 years in special forces right after high school, mastering explosives, followed by 6 years in engineering school. Subsequently, I established my own company, which is now a multi-million-dollar. I'm in the million-dollar construction business, but not many people know about my military service because of the demons I battled. I got my pilot's license before my military service, but Kelly never trusted me enough to join me for rides. I fell in love with Kelly from the first moment, and we got married 2 years later. She came from old money, and her maiden name was Moore. She was related to Richard Moore of the Mayflower. But Kelly's family saw me as a mere servant. Despite this, I spent a lot of money on her, buying a big house in Cambridge, Massachusetts, complete with we've got a car garage and a BMW. We have 2 kids, or more accurately, she has 2 kids, John, 21, and the 19-year-old, both in college. I bought them each a brand new BMW, and I own a 10-year-old GMC 4-wheel drive pickup. We have a car garage and a BMW. We have 2 kids, John, 21, and the 19-year-old, both in college. I bought them each brand new BMWs, and I own a 10-year-old GMC pickup with 4-wheel drive. About 6 years ago, they started mistreating me. Later, they revealed that they don't consider me family. They don't listen to what I say and do what they please, only listening to Kelly, their mother. I hired John 8 years ago, thinking he was my best friend, but the kids seemed to adore him. About a year ago, Kelly accidentally left her email open, and I read through all the messages. I was shocked to find out that she had been despising me since we met, and her whole family was on the same page. To my surprise, I found out that the kids aren't mine. They belong to my ex. My best friend John, a truth they've known for about 6 years. Unbeknownst to me, John knew Kelly before I hired him, and they find humor in my obliviousness to this. My son Rick and John, my ex-best friend, find humor in my ignorance when I married Kelly. My father-in-law also found humor in this. My best friend John knows about the affair for about 6 years, but I didn't know it. John knew Kelly before I hired him, and they think it's funny. My son Rick and John, my ex-best friend, think it's funny that I didn't know about the marriage. My father-in-law insisted on a prenup, which I signed. It expires in 2.5 years after 25 years of marriage and includes an infidelity clause that says cheaters won't get anything. A friend from my military days, Kevin, connected me with Paul, an expert in surveillance. Paul set up a system where Kelly's emails are forwarded to a private account of mine, along with copies of my kids' emails. My whole house is wired to allow me to hear their phone calls. I have video recordings. Without Kevin's involvement, my family might have faced dire consequences. He stopped me from getting violent and suggested ways to hurt my family emotionally, like taking their money, tarnishing their family name, and exposing their disgrace publicly. John and his friends mock me, well aware of the prenup and the affair, eagerly anticipating the arrival of Tom, my best friend, to take over. I have a video of my father. I have videos of my father-in-law talking about a plan to make it look like I got money from him for my company. They've been planning this for years. That's why they had John apply for a job at my company and act like he was my best friend. The only people I trust are my old military friends, and I'm glad to keep in touch with them. My in-laws are talking about a plan to make it look like I got money from them for my company. They've been planning this for years. That's why they had John apply for a job at my company and act like he was my best friend. The only people I really trust are my old military buddies, and I'm glad we're still in touch. I hired Paul as a computer consultant for my company, and he's helped me figure out who my allies and enemies are. This gave me about 1.5 years to get ready for a possible divorce. During that time, I had to act like I was in a bad relationship, not show any love, and only be physically close to people to keep up appearances. I thought about how she treated me badly, and I got even closer to her. I hired Paul to be my company's computer consultant, and he helped me figure out who was my ally and who was my foe. This gave me about 1.5 years to get ready for an impending divorce. During that time, I took on a role that required me to put up with a strained relationship, not showing any love, and only being physically close to her to keep up appearances. I reflected on how she mistreated me and made these encounters with INF really emotional for me. I made sure to do this only when I was sure she hadn't been involved with Joni. Often sent him out of town for business without her catching on. I admit to past indiscretions, but I pretended ignorance to keep up the appearance that John remained my closest friend. To humiliate her, I had public encounters and discreetly conducted DNA tests that revealed our children. These encounters with INF caused her emotional distress. I only did it when I was sure she hadn't been involved with John. I often sent him out of town for business without her knowing. I admit to past indiscretions, but I pretended ignorance to keep up the appearance that John remained my closest friend. I engaged in public encounters and discreetly conducted DNA tests that revealed our children weren't biologically mine, but rather John's. Their elaborate plan involved John taking over the company after our divorce, aiming to exploit and embarrass me privately. I met with a competitor to sell my company at a reduced price. As I trusted his honesty despite our prior competition, I disclosed my reasons for the sale, ensuring confidentiality among a select few, including our lawyers. The law firm I hired shared my disdain for my father. And they weren't technically mine, but John's. Their plan was for John to take over the company after our divorce, trying to exploit and embarrass me in private. I met with a competitor to sell my company at a reduced price, as I trusted his honesty despite our prior competition. I explained my reasons for the sale, making sure that a select few, including our lawyers, knew about it. The law firm I hired was key to my decision to hire them. They gave me guidance on setting up a private bank account and phone account. They also suggested that I convince Kelly and the kids to lease cars instead of buying new ones, a proposal that everyone was on board with. This would ensure annual upgrades at a lower cost for me. Quietly, I started packing my belongings and placing them. I was often laughed at, in front of or behind my back. When I mentioned this idea, I told Kelly that we should file our taxes separately and put the house in her name only, for tax purposes. We needed a new mortgage in her name, which her whole family was on board with. This would make it easier for her to claim the house in the divorce. My new law firm also recommended this to protect my credit, despite her wanting to make home improvements, including an in-ground pool. I let her have what she wanted, funded by a second mortgage in her name, since the house was now solely in her name. The loans also had to be in her name. Half of the funds went towards the changes she wanted, while the other half discreetly found its way into my. I handled all the bills, changed my insurance beneficiaries to send money to charities in case I died, and sold my company without anyone noticing. I made sure the new owners kept all the employees except for JN and his associates. Within a year, everything was ready for my departure. I proposed treating the entire family, including in-laws and my now ex-best friend John, to a 2-week trip to Europe, a move they probably laughed about behind my back, but it served my purpose, especially since Kelly paid for it. I bought 150 acres of land in Alaska on the down low, accessible only by plane, using my hidden pilot's license. Plans were made for I'm planning to build a cabin on stilts and a plane shelter with a hired company, aiming for a move-in ready status. I also bought a house with a big barn-like garage in Fairbanks, where I can keep a motor home and have a place to stay when I want to travel. A military friend who shares my dislike for my inn. I bought a cabin on stilts with a plane shelter that a hired company was building. I was hoping to have it ready to move into, but it's going to take longer. I also bought a house with a big garage-like garage. My residence would be in Fairbanks. It's a simple house where I could keep a motor home and have a place to stay when I wanted to travel. A military friend who shared my dislike for my in-laws registered a new motor home in his name, despite his reluctance. I insisted on compensating him and my other friends for their assistance. From Kelly's emails, they believed I was naive. I ceased payments on the house, their cars, insurances, and utilities, all in Kelly's name. Thus, her credit would suffer, not mine. I established a P.O. box in Kelly's name, and I had all bills sent there. This created the illusion that I was managing their finances. When the divorce is finalized, her credit will be impacted, and she won't receive alimony. I've got payments from and they won't dig up the details of my company's sale. All the cash went to an offshore account, so it looks like I lost the company to the new owners. Also, my plan is to just vanish right before the trip. He told them about a company emergency, saying I'd be back later. They didn't seem too worried about me not being there. The night before they left, I made sure Kelly would remember me. I told her I pushed boundaries. This was the first and last time, and she was initially happy, but ultimately upset and angry. It was too bad for John, who had been involved with her for years, but had denied me the same experiences. Once they left for Europe, I returned to the house, leaving it wide open. My friend Paul retrieved surveillance equipment, and I paid a moving van company in cash to transport my belongings to Alaska. I took essentials, such as clothes, tools, and fishing gear, along with weapons from my military days. I stored them securely until I left all the furniture behind when I left, and I made sure that no one would find out where I was going. I didn't leave any papers with my address on them, so my son, Mike, didn't know where I was going. He's not really into hunting or fishing with me, so he didn't know about my usual trip destinations. I kept my old phone account so Kelly wouldn't know about my plan to close it in about a month when I left. I left my old phone with a colleague, telling him not to answer calls from my wife, but he could make calls for a month. Then, I went to my inn. I was living in a house with my keys, turning on all the lights, and using Mike's laptop. I posted on a college website about a week-long college kegger party at their house. I was expecting some trouble, and I knew they were cheap and liked John, so I closed all the bank accounts and credit cards from my wife's and my accounts, which added up to $50,000. I sold my truck to a car dealer and, after 3 days, departed for Alaska without disclosing my destination. I monitored events through my wife's emails, and no one, including my wife, kids, in-laws, or ex, knew where I was going. My best friend tried to find out where I was, but they didn't know that my wife, Kelly, was paying for everything. I took my time, enjoying the trip, and I only used cash for expenses. I drove to Bellingham, Washington, and then took a ferry to Valdez, Alaska. I drove to Fairbanks, all without needing a passport. By the time I reached Washington, Kelly and her family had returned from Europe, finding their homes and properties wrecked. They were totally clueless that I had orchestrated it. Surprisingly, they hadn't noticed my absence, being more concerned about their houses than my departure. It was the police, not my so-called friends, who found me. I continued on to Fairbanks without needing a passport by the time I reached Washington. Kelly and her family had returned from Europe, finding their homes and properties completely wrecked. They were unaware that I had orchestrated it. Surprisingly, they hadn't noticed my absence. They were more concerned about their houses than my departure. It was the police, not me, who called the family, who started inquiring about me on that Sunday, a day after their return to the United States. I granted my attorney written power of attorney for my divorce. I informed them that I would check in 2 weeks later, without revealing my whereabouts. On Monday morning, Kelly received her infidelity divorce papers, although I wanted to sue John for alienation of affection. Massachusetts law prohibited it due to numerous lawsuits against. On that Sunday, a day after they got back to the U.S., they started asking about me. I told them I'd check in 2 weeks later, but I didn't say where. On Monday morning, Kelly got the papers for her divorce, even though I wanted to sue John for alienation of affection. Massachusetts law didn't allow it because of all the lawsuits against. John and his friends still lost their jobs, as I had agreed with the new company owners. With all his stuff gone, it was a shame. Kelly was in debt, with creditors after her, and her cars were repossessed. The power and water were cut off, the property taxes and both mortgages were overdue, and she and her spoiled kids had to move into her parents' hotel because their home was trashed. Her parents had to rent cars for the whole family, and they were feeling sorry for them. John also had to move in with them, begging Kelly's parents for a rental car. They went from BMWs to less impressive vehicles. Kelly and her family hired private investigators to find me, while Kelly's attorneys tried to stop the divorce. This was a futile move, and the case got a lot of attention when DNA test results and explicit videos were shared. Her parents had to rent cars for the whole family, and they felt bad for what they were going through. John also had to move in with them, begging Kelly's parents for a rental car. They switched from BMWs to less impressive vehicles. Kelly and her family hired private investigators to find me, while Kelly's attorneys tried to stop the divorce. This was a futile move. The case got a lot of attention in the media after DNA test results and explicit videos were made public. Online audio recordings exposed how long the affair had lasted, how her family was involved, and their plans to ruin and humiliate me publicly, seize my company, and show how much they hate the middle class. Videos and audio of her family bribing politicians and public officials and mistreating honest people were spread on different websites. The judge assigned to the case had to step down because he was one of the exposed, paid videos and audio of her family bribing politicians and public officials and mistreating honest people were spread on different websites. The judge assigned to the case had to recuse himself because he was one of the exposed paid off public officials. Though I reached out to the kids, they ignored me. 5 years later, during a visit to Boston to finalize some old business, I went to a restaurant frequented by her family. They walked past me without recognizing me, now with long gray hair, a beard, and in better shape. I asked my waiter to send their table a bottle of champagne. The entire family looked 20 years older. They stared at me, and after a few minutes, Kelly yelled, "Oh my God, you son of a gun!" She recognized me and revealed my identity. John tried to come at me, but I knocked him out with one punch. His son showed up, and I subdued him, but not completely. Kelly ran up, yelling at me for ruining her family and hurling insults. The police showed up and arrested me. I had the waiter get in touch with my lawyer, since I doubted the police would let me go. They reviewed the surveillance tapes, which showed me being cool with them, and then they let me go. The footage showed me sending champagne and calmly chatting with them, showing myself. I tried to talk to John, but I knocked him out with one punch. Then his son came up, and I subdued him, but not completely. Kelly ran up, yelling at me for ruining her family and hurling insults. The police arrived and arrested me. I had the waiter contact my lawyer, since I doubted the police would let me talk to him. They reviewed the surveillance tapes, and it showed me sending champagne and calmly talking with them. It showed my self-defense stance, and it showed that my lawyer didn't prepare for this kind of thing and didn't get copies of the surveillance tapes. I think the police wouldn't have let me go if they knew about my father-in-law. Kelly called my hotel room to talk, and we met in the lobby to make sure the conversation was recorded. She asked why I did what I did. I looked at her, and I told her that I found out about her plan against me, and that's why I did what I did. I told her that I knew about her relationship with John, and I asked why she married me if she hated me. I didn't talk about the wired house or the spying through her email. They lost their house, and Mike lost his house and truck. He had to live with her parents. Kelly said it was nothing personal. At first, she admitted to enjoying messing with me and getting a kick out of the whole John thing. I asked why she didn't just divorce me when she met John, and she said it was fun at first, and that she'd get everything she wanted. She left it at that, and went back to my room without saying anything else. The next day, I left for Alaska to start a new, peaceful life. I left them to deal with the mess I caused in their lives. They'd rather deal with credit, finance, pride, and reputation than resort to violence. They'll have to live with the constant reminder of me,